Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome again to another episode on Talk Architecture Podcast. I am going to react to a post by an architect in LinkedIn. And I would like to say that I won't give names here because I didn't ask for permission. So if you're in the right circle and you notice this, you will know what I mean. However, whatever I'm going to say is pertinent to the discussion about what's happening to the architecture profession. And although I'm talking from the point of view of someone from Malaysia, I'm also appealing to the global architecture community. This person posted, "A profession doesn't lose respect overnight. It loses it quietly," in capital letters. It goes on to say that in Malaysia, architects often ask why our role feels smaller than it should, why we're brought in late, why our judgment is questioned, why our fees are negotiated before our value is understood. And there you have the issue of value. It continues with the answer isn't simple, but part of it is uncomfortable. For a long time, architects have been very good at doing the work and very quiet about what the work actually involves. We simplify our role to keep things moving. We stay polite to avoid friction. We absorb scope creep and call it being flexible. Over time, that silence becomes the narrative. When architects don't define their profession, others will. When responsibility is hidden, it looks optional. When expertise is understated, it gets treated as interchangeable. It isn't about blaming anyone, it's about recognizing that respect is built through clarity, not compliance. Architecture needs voices, calm ones, consistent ones, because a profession that doesn't speak for itself will slowly be spoken over. Now, I'm going to discuss this purely from the point of view from an academic or an architecture educationist. That's because that's what I do. And I would like to say that we do not defend architecture in the universities either, or defend in terms of what we needed to protect, what we need to not give up on, what we need to not give any leeway, or shall we say compromise. And because I see it as the root of the problem, which is the guilt or the burden that we place on our shoulders for not defending architecture education. Now, we have in the past, in Talk Architecture, talk about how we could reduce the number of years before we can get to do part 3. That is in some podcasts earlier. So we do have the usual 3 years degree. If you do not have the prerequisite, you would have to do a diploma in architecture. But basically, it's 3 years degree, 2 years master's or postgraduate diploma. Nowadays, it's master's is a given. And then 2 to 3 years, you can do it in 2 years. But usually people take longer to get the license. And I think similarly, in countries such as United States and United Kingdom and other countries, usually the language, English-speaking courses, and also others as well, they follow the same duration of time. Now, we know that the core competency is the architectural design studio, and integrated into the projects or understanding to do with environmental science, sustainability, construction and materials, history and theory, professional practice, which is being taught much earlier than just after fifth year. So here we have a situation in architecture education. If we're talking about part 3, we got to talk about part 1 and part 2. It's logical. It's necessary because we want the students of architecture or the graduates to be ready for employment and to not give up on being an architect. So listening to all this debate and reading this kind of posts, because nowadays we can read all this very easily, if you are a student of architecture and it doesn't seem so promising. So comments here is with regard to United States, what the problems are and how architecture is no longer a professional, and also in the UK, the RIBA president gave up on his registration. So we have sort of like not only society or the top dog or the main guy in government not believing in the profession anymore, thinking that it's not a professional course or institution, which affects other countries, obviously, what's happening around there. Now, why is that? So when recently in Malaysia, architects are allowed, or there is a court case that reinstated that architects are allowed to submit for planning permission or planning approval, which I, being educated in the UK, I was kind of surprised about that. But anyway, so this kind of sort of caused a uncomfortableness between the profession and the country, because architects were suddenly coming out of the woodwork. They're no more being quiet here, saying, oh yes, of course, because implying other things which is not comfortable for the other profession, like the planners. When things like this happen, we all need to be professional about it, says the planners. And okay, so what is the problem in the first place? To me, the architecture education is lost because of a lot of this reliance on digital architecture and digital tools in architecture education. The idea that you need to sketch well, I mean, let's face it, yeah, I'm sure the fine arts course do not allow for the students in fine arts to to draw in digital architecture when they're in the first year, second year, third year. They need to prove themselves in a variety of mediums before they could be better in digital architecture. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. But this is similar to architecture because it is, again, I would like to say that its roots are in arts and humanities, not in science and technology. And there is this thing that could be lost, these sensibilities of being someone who synthesize functional, the three utilitas, a function, beauty, aesthetics, and the third one, which is firmness, which is about structure. The integration of these three things in architecture and how an architecture student would understand this is crucial. How it is built, what different types of materials to be built, and how the connections should be drawn before they do digital architecture. And this is the problem that we've been having in the last decade. We've been panicking. we've been imagining that architecture needs to keep up with the fast pace of digitalization and end up that there is some redundancy in terms of the part one student and the part two graduate. Yeah, the part one graduate and the part two graduate, in which there is this shifting of goals, or a shifting of, shall we say, faith and belief in the profession from the academics points of view, in which what's happening in the profession, how should we adjust, and then suddenly we don't know which which principle to hold on, which discipline. I mean, we don't know our discipline anymore, and how we could actually steer ourselves through this need to integrate artificial intelligence in our course. When that had happened, even when I was still an academic, where digitalization was deemed to be important, and thereafter artificial intelligence creeping in. Now, why does it need to creep into the design courses? So when the universities graduate students, they have to graduate them because there's one of the things called the key performance indicators, where you have to graduate the students. You can't be failing them, and that tells something that you're not doing your job, obviously. So you graduate them knowing fully well that they are not confident to be working in the industry. And you hear individual stories of how they have not the skills, and employers do not want to pay them the amount of money. So the value in students of architecture starts. The value of architects starts when they were students. And if they can't compete, they can't actually do the three things I mentioned to integrate the three basic things, never mind sustainability, never mind environmental science and other factors, just function, utility, venustas, utilitas, and firmatas, via Vitruvius. You can't have a profession that has diluted what they have sought to do or had done in the past. And this way, everybody's kind of afraid. Everybody's fearful of what's going to happen, what's to come. So back to the story here of the post that I mentioned about the profession doesn't lose respect overnight, it loses it quietly, because people look at architects and why are they there? We could just do BIM, Revit, we'll just produce BIM experts or Revit experts, and they can do the work, and we don't need architects really. So they don't really respect the architecture profession, because the architecture profession doesn't defend itself. It doesn't, like it's a lady who said this. She's trying to tell the world that, we're not respecting ourselves, thus we lose the value of ourselves. And it starts with education, really. Why are we not defending the key, percentage of what academics should be focusing on? Academics in the School of Architecture that are in research universities in particular, the maximum is 30% teaching. Why can't it be 60% teaching? Because you need to have them teaching the students day in, day out, week in, week out. And this has to be, they are free, they have the time, and they get promoted for teaching properly. It's not, publications on, it's not the positions that they want to be like a professor in architecture need to be recognized if they are teachers, proper teachers. And then they do a curriculum that's robust that will assist the architecture profession. So there is no, shall we say, excuses anymore. We've got to go back to the basics of what an architecture profession is. And the signs are clear. It is not only in Malaysia, it's elsewhere, in which architects are not respected by not only society, but also the other professional bodies. So, yes, I would like to go into detail about this. Like, I had an interview with one of the senior women architect, and she mentioned about they take in BIM modelers. And that's how the profession have evolved. And when we talk about BIM modelers with an architecture background, it seems to suggest that they're good at the system, they're good at the tools, but they can't. Can they innovate? Can they help to create a situation where experimentation can happen, and is clearly to do something with the value of the architect to explore different ideas. Not the tools explore the different ideas, but the architect. Can we start with this first sketch first? Now, I am not going to sit and listen to, shall we say, people say you don't know how to sketch in digital. I'm not going to argue with that sort of argument that, you would want to argue back with the points that I have said. What I'm trying to say is that architecture starts with arts and humanities, and throughout the whole of this last decade, we have given it away. We have given away the soul of architecture. That is because we haven't really been united. We're so concerned with the peripheral issues that we haven't really looked at as why we existed at all. And the thing is, the value that we place upon ourselves and how we show ourselves need to be understood. And it's true that this, again, I'm going to go back to this post. The points that was given in some sort of a booklet of 10 pages, architects didn't lose respect, we misplace it. By, it doesn't say who is it by, but I assume that the author did it. Brought in late, questioned early, negotiated hard. The first point. It's like as if the client are not comfortable with the role of the architect. But previously, everybody knows that the architect is the person in charge of the consultant team. Why is the architect being bought by others? For example, other professions are ahead, appointed by the client and not the architect. This is something that is curious. It's making me curious. More and more my ex-students are going to developers. They're working for developers rather than architecture companies. And even big architecture companies have the developer wing. Now, in the whole profession, developer would be the client, the one that will pay everybody else. So the developer feels that the architect is not the main person to, shall we say, organize everyone, as what we've learned before, but other consultants are asked earlier than the architect, such as the engineers or the quantity surveyors. It says here not because architecture isn't important, but because the work is misunderstood. And most of what I said in this podcast was about how it is misunderstood. We can't just say it's misunderstood, but not explain. It's misunderstood because the value of integrating three things together to make good architecture, and only the architect can do so and not the other consultants. And needing the architect to organize everyone because that vision or the idea or the skills to do so is from the architect and not the other profession. So if you could just, if because you're not seriously, shall we say, defend good architecture, not just simply facade treatment, but you actually try to think about locality, the site, and you're thinking about, when you talk about context, you're talking about the people. You actually, as an architect, would be able to deal that better than other people. So if you're not defending the other client, which is the users of the building, and you also think like the other consultants, that those are just numbers, and think like the client, you're not defending that. As a united force of all architects should stand by that, thinking about for the society, that's lack of values. And the government, if they're going to say, okay, the architects are important because they understand how to build for human beings, they design for human beings, they have to understand the design problem, and that design problem is what is going to lead the whole project. So it could be the government, it could be the clients, and the client don't see that value, and it's merely speculative. So the architect is just a formality, a formal cog in the machine. Even in the Architecture Act in Malaysia, there's only a paragraph that regard to society. The Architect Act itself is just to do with contracts. Everything in the profession, I'm just talking about education, but also when we start digging in deeper about the profession, the one that I know, that issue that the architect stands for just business, then we're losing out. We're letting, maybe it helps before, but now with the advent of digital technology and artificial intelligence, we've lost ourselves. And thus it's easier to be misunderstood. The fourth page is, we do the thinking, we manage the risk, we carry the responsibility. Obviously, that becomes more of a burden because we are misunderstood. And we do everything else, but not protecting our value in being the architect. Back to what is an architect? Again, back to the point I said earlier. We simplify to be easy to work with. We stay polite to keep things smooth. We absorb the mess. Well, architect has to be master of none, jack of all trades last time. And it's because of that coordination and organizing job that they do. But even when I was doing my part one, we had a project manager, which is not an architect, but quantitative surveyor background. But he knew how to stay away from the architect's job and how the architects would shape the identity of the building. And silence becomes a story. And when architects don't define their role, others happily will. This isn't about complaining, it's about clarity. Yes, others will determine what role we play. And it stems from architecture education, because in the universities itself, architects, or the architecture education course is in together with the other courses. which are the real estate courses. For goodness sake, there's nothing in common with that. And we're in that faculty, and then the planners are there. And then we don't have the engineers, we have the quantity surveyors and the building surveyors. So what we have there are, yes, we will meet them in the industry, but we don't have to survive. We don't have to have them dictate what architecture courses are. And that's the problem. Often well, I would reserve this comment, but even if they were not an architect, the dean could be sympathetic to architecture if we defend it better. But, like other professions like engineering or medicine, they are very good at defending their profession and not, shall we say, compromise. We need to see ourselves as different from these other courses that are in the Faculty of Built Environment. I think it's a bad idea that they had the Faculty of the Built Environment, in my opinion. Architecture school need to be independent. At least go to the arts and humanities or be with the creative arts. Or even engineering would have been more relevant. But yes, these are the things that we have built or made a hole and bury ourselves in it and cover it up and making ourselves very difficult to get out from. So this is a no holds bar. This is an unfiltered message, unfiltered mentoring. I'm a life coach for architects since I was a coach in the School of Architecture, and I still can see the point of view and the ideas that we're not recognizing, we're not observant enough, we're not asking the hard questions. And it's out there, the problems. We need to start the conversation, the discussion, and therefore realize before it's too late that the architecture profession needs to understand its own value before it can influence others. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast.